In 1974, a railroad worker's wife in El Paso fed 7 people on $9 a week. Ground beef at 66 cents a pound was her only meat. She turned 1 pound into 4 meals across 4 nights. The dish she made every Monday is number 1 on this list. Number 19 started at a Texas football concession stand. Number 8 only came out once a year, around Mexican Independence Day. These 25 recipes were survival. They fed families in barrio kitchens from San Antonio to East Los Angeles. If you grew up in a Mexican-American household in the 1970s, you ate these meals. If you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. Let us count them down. Pause for 1 second. Number 25. Pastel de papa con carne. This was the dish that proved Mexican-American cooking was its own tradition. Not fully Mexican, not fully American, but something in between that worked. Ground beef browned with taco seasoning, layered with diced tomatoes, black beans, corn, and olives. Mashed potatoes spread across the top. Shredded cheese melted over everything under the broiler. The whole thing cost about $2.50 and fed the entire family from one dish. Your mama saw a recipe for shepherd's pie in a magazine, and she said she could make it better. She could. She did. She added cumin, chili powder, and jalapenos. The British had their shepherd's pie. Mexican-American families had pastel de papa. Mama never followed the magazine recipe exactly. She used it as a starting point and made it her own. That is what Mexican-American cooking always was. Taking what was available and turning it into something better. That was the whole tradition. Number 24. Beef chorizo casado. Saturday morning in a Mexican-American kitchen smelled one way. Ground beef sizzling in a cast iron skillet with ancho chile powder, paprika, apple cider vinegar, garlic, oregano, and cumin. That deep red color staining the pan. That was homemade chorizo. Traditional Mexican chorizo used pork, but in the 1970s, many families made it with ground beef because it was cheaper. Some families did not eat pork at all. You did not need casings or special equipment. Just ground beef mixed with spices by hand. A batch cost about $1.25. Papa made his own because the store-bought stuff did not taste right. He was not wrong. You scrambled it with eggs for chorizo con huevo. You stuffed it into warm flour tortillas with a smear of refried beans. The vinegar and chili aroma filled the whole house before anyone was fully awake. You woke up to it on Saturday mornings, and you knew exactly what day it was. That was the weekend. Number 23. Sopapilla ground beef bake. This dish only existed in one part of the country. If you grew up there, you know exactly what it is. New Mexico. Arizona. The southwest borderlands where Native American and Mexican-American food traditions met on the same plate. Sopapillas share the exact same dough recipe as Navajo fry bread. The only difference is shape. Sopapillas puff up into hollow pillows. Fry bread stays flat and dense. In the 1970s, families layered sopapilla dough with seasoned ground beef, refried beans, shredded cheddar, and sour cream. The whole casserole cost about $2. You found this at state fairs, powwows, and church fundraisers across New Mexico and Arizona. Vendors sold versions topped with lettuce and tomato. You drizzled honey on the sopapilla while the savory meat dripped off the sides, sweet and savory at once. 2 cultures sharing one plate. That only happened in the Southwest. And if you did not grow up there, you missed it. Number 22. Chilaquiles con carne molida. Sunday morning after a Saturday night gathering. The kitchen counter was still covered with leftover tortillas. Nobody threw those out. You cut them into triangles, fried them crisp in oil, and poured salsa verde or salsa roja right over the top. The chips softened in the sauce. Then you added browned ground beef, scrambled eggs, crema, queso fresco, sliced onion and cilantro. The Aztecs had a word for this. Chilaquiles. It meant chilies and greens. By the 1970s, Mexican-American families across the Southwest had turned it into the ultimate morning-after meal. The whole dish cost about $1.75. It used up every scrap from the night before. Nothing went to waste, and it tasted like someone cared enough to turn last night's leftovers into something beautiful. That was the whole point of it. Number 21. Tortas de carne molida. This was a working man's lunch, wrapped in aluminum foil, carried to the job site in a paper bag, and eaten with one hand during a 15-minute break. A bolillo from the local Mexican bakery, split open and spread with refried beans and mayonnaise. Seasoned ground beef piled inside. Sliced avocado, jalapenos, tomato, and a layer of melting asadero cheese. 4 tortas cost about $1.25. Tortas go back centuries in Mexico City as street food. But in the 1970s barrios of Texas and California, they were how families sent fathers and brothers to factory work and field work with a real meal. Not a sandwich. A torta. The bolillo was still warm from the panaderia. The foil kept everything together until noon. Mama wrapped those tortas before sunrise while everyone slept. That was love wrapped in aluminum foil. Number 20. Caldillo de carne molida. It comes from the northern Mexico borderlands, especially Chihuahua and El Paso. Caldillo means little broth. It is lighter than chili, thinner than stew, but it fills you up the same way. Ground beef is browned with onion and garlic. Diced potatoes, sliced jalapenos, and tomatoes are added. Beef broth is seasoned with cumin, oregano, and black pepper. A pot cost about $1.50. This was the soup you made when it was cold outside and money was tight. Papa came home from work to a steaming bowl waiting at his place at the table. The jalapenos warmed you from the inside out. You ate it with warm tortillas, tearing off pieces and dipping them into the broth until the bowl was clean. Simple, hearty, honest. Nobody wrote cookbooks about caldillo. The people who needed it already knew how to make it. It was home food for people who actually needed it. Pause for 1 second. Number 19. Molletes con carne molida. After school. 3:30 in the afternoon. You walked through the front door, and the smell of toasting bread and melting cheese hit you before you dropped your backpack. Bolillos, split in half, spread with butter, then refried beans, then seasoned ground beef, then Chihuahua or Oaxaca cheese, broiled until bubbly and golden. Topped with pico de gallo or salsa verde, 4 servings for about $1.50. The bolillo itself has a history. French bakers brought that crusty roll to Mexico during the French intervention in the 1860s. Mexicans took it and made it their own. By the 1970s, it was the bread of every Mexican-American household. Molletes were the Mexican-American answer to grilled cheese, except they had beans, seasoned meat, and salsa all on one open face. They were cheap and fast, and better than anything from a lunchbox. That was the after-school meal every kid ran home for. Number 18. Chiles en nogada. This was not a weeknight dinner. This was the most patriotic dish in all of Mexico, and it took all day to make. In 1821, the nuns of the Santa Monica convent in Puebla created this dish to welcome General Agustín de Iturbide after he signed the Treaty of Córdoba and declared Mexican independence. The colors represent the Mexican flag: green from the poblano pepper, white from the walnut cream sauce, and red from the pomegranate seeds scattered across the top. The filling was ground beef and pork mixed with dried fruits like pear, peach, and apple, plus almonds, raisins, cinnamon, and cloves. That filling balanced sweet and savory in a way that felt celebratory. The walnut sauce was made from fresh walnuts blended with cream cheese and milk. The walnut cream is rich and slightly tangy. A single batch cost over $5, making it the most expensive recipe on this list by far. Abuela only made chiles en nogada once a year, around September 16th, Mexican Independence Day. The whole family gathered in the kitchen for the occasion. The children shelled walnuts. The teenagers seeded pomegranates. Abuela roasted the poblanos over the open flame, and the house filled with smoke and history. The process took hours. Eating that dish meant something deeper than flavor. It was about identity. It was about pride. It was about remembering where your family came from, even if you had not been back to Mexico in years. Every pomegranate seed on that plate carried the weight of heritage. Some recipes feed your stomach. This one fed your soul. And the families who still make it every September are keeping alive something that no restaurant can replicate. Number 17. Arroz con carne molida. 1 skillet, 1 burner, $1. This was the dish you made the week before payday when the refrigerator was nearly empty. Ground beef browned in the pan, then white rice toasted alongside it until golden. Tomato sauce poured over both. Onion, garlic, jalapenos, diced tomatoes, and 1 Knorr chicken bouillon cube. That bouillon cube was the secret ingredient in every Mexican-American kitchen in the 1970s. It made everything taste the way Mama's cooking was supposed to taste. The whole skillet cost about $1.25 and fed 6 people. Rice came to Mexico through the Manila to Acapulco galleon trade route in the 1500s. By the 1970s, arroz rojo was already a side dish at every dinner. Adding ground beef turned the side into the main course on lean weeks. You served it with warm tortillas and a squeeze of lime. Nobody complained. Nobody asked for seconds. There were no seconds to give. But nobody went hungry either. That was the math that mattered. Number 16. Tostadas de carne molida. Nothing was wasted in a Mexican-American kitchen. Day-old corn tortillas that had gone stiff overnight did not go in the trash. They went into hot oil. You fried them flat until golden and crisp. Then spread refried beans across the surface, spooned seasoned ground beef on top, and piled on shredded iceberg lettuce, diced tomato, sour cream, shredded cheese, and a few shakes of tapatio. The whole meal cost about $1.50 to feed a family. Tostada means toasted. It is one of the most ancient preparations in Mexican cooking. A stale tortilla brought back to life through heat and oil. Eating tostadas required a certain acceptance of chaos. You had to lean over your plate. Toppings slid off everywhere. Shells cracked in half on the second bite. Kids loved them because they could build their own and pile the toppings as high as they wanted. That was dinner and entertainment on one plate. Number 15. Flautas de carne molida. Flauta means flute in Spanish, name for the long, thin shape. You filled a large flour tortilla with ground beef cooked in salsa, rolled it as tight as you could, and pinned it shut with a toothpick. Then into hot oil until golden and crisp all the way around. Abuela had a system. She could roll a dozen flautas in the time it took you to roll one. Her fingers moved without thinking. By the 1970s, frozen taquitos from brands like El Monterrey had started showing up in supermarkets. But Abuela still made hers from scratch because the frozen ones were not the same, and she knew it. A batch of 12 cost about $2. You served them buried under shredded lettuce, drizzled with crema and queso fresco, with tomatillo avocado salsa on the side. You heard the crunch of that first bite, through the crispy shell into the seasoned meat inside. That was the sound of a Friday night done the way it was supposed to be done. Number 14. Vintage Mexican casserole. If there is one dish that defines the 1970s Mexican-American kitchen, it might be this one. The era loved casseroles. One dish, one oven, 1 hour, done. Ground chuck browned with onions and taco seasoning from a McCormick packet. McCormick introduced those packets in 1971. And by mid-decade, every Mexican-American pantry had a stack of them. You layered the meat with canned rotel tomatoes, canned corn, canned refried beans, corn tortillas, shredded cheddar, and sour cream in a 9x13 dish. The whole casserole cost about $2.50. This was the recipe card in Mama's box, stained with grease spots from years of use. Wednesday night dinner. You opened cans while the beef sizzled. The cheese bubbled under the broiler. Here is the thing about that 9x13 dish. It was the most powerful tool in the 1970s Mexican-American kitchen. Casseroles were not lazy cooking. They were how working mothers fed families of 6 on a single income while holding down jobs themselves. They were how church ladies filled potluck tables. They were how tradition survived inside a Pyrex dish when there was no time for all-day cooking. Every canned ingredient was a shortcut earned by women who did not have the luxury of leisurely afternoons at the stove. And the food was still good. It was still made with care. That mattered more than any recipe from a magazine ever could. Number 13. Empanadas de carne molida. Saturday morning. The whole family gathered around the kitchen table, with flour dusted across every surface. Mama rolled out circles of dough, while the children waited with forks to crimp the edges. The word empanada comes from the Spanish empanar, meaning coated in bread. The recipe traveled from Galicia in northwest Spain and spread across all of Latin America. In Mexico, the most common filling was ground beef and potato picadillo, with carrots and peas. It was seasoned with cumin, chili powder, onion, and garlic. You could fry them or bake them. A dozen cost about $2. The kids fought over who got the first one out of the oil, still too hot to hold comfortably. Abuela's hands knew exactly when the dough was right, without measuring a thing. She never used a recipe card. She was following a memory handed down from her own mother, who learned it from hers. Number 12. Gorditas de carne molida. Gordita means little fat one. That is the actual name. A thick, plump disc of masa cooked on a comal or fried in oil, then split open like a pocket and stuffed with seasoned ground beef picadillo. Unlike sopes, where toppings go on top, gorditas hold the filling inside. Families in northern Mexico tended to fry theirs for extra crunch. A batch of 8 cost about $1.75. You remember the gordita lady at the local mercado or the church bazaar. You watched her hands work the masa without stopping, without measuring, without looking down. The sizzle when each one hit the oil. She could shape them faster than you could eat them. Biting through the crispy outside into the warm, savory meat inside was pure comfort. Street food that became home food that became childhood memory. That is how traditions travel. Hand to hand, kitchen to kitchen. Number 11. Sopes de carne molida. The pinched rim is what makes a sope a sope. A thick disc of masa cooked on a comal, then the edges pinched up by hand while still warm, forming a small boat with raised set sides. The roots go back thousands of years to pre-Hispanic Mesoamerican corn cookery and the nixtamalization process. In the 1970s, sopes were street food. Antojitos. Little cravings, vendors sold them for pennies at open-air markets across Mexico and the Southwest. You spread refried beans on the base, spooned seasoned ground beef on top, then finished with shredded lettuce, crumbled queso fresco, salsa verde, and crema. 8 to 10 sope cost about $2 to make at home. Abuela was pinching the edges of warm masa with her bare fingers, shaping each boat by hand without a mold or a press. You remember the smell of masa on the hot comal. Those were market day memories that never left you. Number 10. Calabacitas con carne molida. This dish came from the backyard garden. Abuela sent the kids outside to pick calabacitas off the vine and bring them in. Mexican gray zucchini, or whatever summer squash was growing that season. Every kitchen in Mexico knows calabacitas a la mexicana by heart. You browned a pound of ground beef with onion and garlic, then added sliced zucchini, yellow squash, fresh corn cut from the cob, green chile, and tomato sauce. Queso fresco crumbled over the top while everything was still hot. The whole dish cost about $1.50, even less if the squash came from the garden. This was the meal you made when the vines were overflowing and money was tight. Simple food, honest food, no recipe needed. You grew it, you picked it, you cooked it, you ate it. That was the whole system. That was how a garden fed a family. Number 9. Mexican meatloaf. In Spanish, it was called pastel de carne, meat cake. Every American family in the 1970s made meatloaf. But in Mexican-American kitchens, a plain meatloaf was never going to happen. Mama mixed ground beef with crumbled chorizo, breadcrumbs and egg. She added roasted peppers, ancho and guajillo chiles, onion and garlic. She topped it with salsa instead of ketchup. The whole thing cost about $2 and fed the family, with enough left over for sandwiches the next day. The kids did not even realize their meatloaf was different from what their Anglo friends ate at home. Not until they went to someone else's house for dinner and tested a plain one with nothing but ketchup on top. That was the moment they understood. Mama had been making it better the whole time. She just never said anything about it. She never needed to. Number 8. Enchiladas de carne molida. Sunday dinner after church. This was the ritual that held the week together. You dip corn tortillas one at a time into warm oil to soften them. You filled each one with seasoned ground beef and rolled it tight. You lined them up in a casserole dish and covered them in homemade red enchilada sauce made from pureed tomato, broth, garlic, onion, oregano, cumin, and ground ancho chile powder. Shredded cheddar and Monterey Jack melted over the top in the oven. A pan of 12 enchiladas cost about $2.50. The origins go back to the Aztecs, who ate something called Chilaquiles, which means chile flute. Filled, rolled tortillas dipped in chile paste. That was the ancestor of every enchilada you have ever eaten in your life. By the 1970s, every abuela in every barrio claimed her enchilada sauce was the best one in the neighborhood. And she was right. They were all right, because the recipe was never about exact proportions or written measurements. It was about the hands that made it. Those hands had been rolling tortillas for decades without stopping to think. They moved without measuring cups. They seasoned by instinct, not by teaspoons. They knew when the sauce was right by the color and the smell, not by any timer. And when the whole family gathered around that table after church, still dressed in their Sunday clothes, and the casserole dish got passed from one end to the other, with everyone reaching in, that was not just dinner. That was the week starting over fresh. That was the family saying, we are still here, we are still together, and we are still cooking the food our grandmothers taught us to make with their own hands. That was heritage passed down on a plate. Number 7. Frito pie. The oldest known frito recipe with chili was published in Texas in 1949. Some say Daisy Doolin invented it. She was the mother of Charles Elmer Doolin, the man who founded the Frito Company. Others credit Teresa Hernandez, who served it from the bag at the Woolworth's lunch counter in Santa Fe, New Mexico in the 1960s. By the 1970s, it did not matter who invented it. Frito pie belonged to Friday night football across Texas and the Southwest. You split open a bag of Fritos, about 25 cents per bag, spooned ground beef chili over the top, added shredded cheddar and raw chopped onion, and ate it from the bag with a plastic fork. The concession stand at every high school game sold them. Mexican-American families ate frito pies under the stadium lights while their kids played on the field. A uniquely Mexican-American creation that crossed into the mainstream without anyone ever noticing where it came from. Number 6. Chili con carne. The term chile con carne first appeared in print in 1857 in a book about the Mexican-American War. But the dish started long before that with working-class Tejana women in San Antonio. They were called the Chili Queens. They set up tables at Military Plaza and dished out steaming bowls under the stars to anyone who could pay. Canary Islander families who immigrated to San Antonio in 1731 helped lay the foundation. In 1893, the San Antonio Chili stand at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago introduced chili to the rest of America. By 1977, it became the official state dish of Texas. Typical ingredients were ground beef, dried chili peppers, cumin, garlic, onion, and tomatoes. No beans in the authentic Texas version. A pot cost $1.50 and fed 6 to 8 people easily. By the 1970s, every Mexican-American family had their own closely guarded secret recipe. Friday night chili with a slab of cornbread on the side. That was the tradition nobody argued with. Number 5. Tamale pie. Tamale pie is a time-saving casserole alternative. The first tamale pie recipe appeared in print in 1911, though earlier versions from the 1890s exist in regional cookbooks. It was invented because making real tamales from scratch was too time-consuming for a weeknight dinner, and cooks realized they could cook the whole thing in a single dish instead. Ground beef with onion, canned tomatoes, chili powder and cumin formed the bottom layer. Cornbread batter was spread across the top. Canned corn, black olives and cheese were mixed in. A full casserole cost about $1.75. During the Great Depression and World War II, the government actually printed recipes for tamale pie and distributed them to help families stretch their meat rations. It was patriotic to make tamale pie. The dish was never popular inside Mexico itself, but in Mexican-American households, it became a church potluck staple that everyone expected to see on the table. Every abuela had her own version. One casserole fed 20 people for under $5. That was effective community cooking at its best. Number 4. Tacos dorados. Golden tacos. The first known English language reference to a hard-shell taco appeared in the Los Angeles Times in 1899. The earliest published recipe showed up in a California Mexican cookbook in 1914. By the 1970s, tacos dorados were a Friday night assembly line in Mexican-American kitchens across the Southwest. Corn tortillas were filled with seasoned ground beef picadillo, rolled tight, and fried in oil until golden and crisp. They were topped with shredded iceberg lettuce, diced tomato, crumbled queso fresco, and salsa roja. Feeding a family of 6 cost about $2.50. The kids lined up at the counter to add their own toppings, arguing about who got the crispiest one. You could hear the sound of tortillas hitting hot oil and see the splatter marks on Mama's apron that never fully washed out, no matter how many times it went through the machine. Food historians called tacos dorados an example of the Mexican-American immigrant experience. They were right. This was food that traveled across a border and transformed into something new. Number 3. Chile relleno casserole. Traditional chiles rellenos from Puebla required you to stuff each pepper individually, batter it, and fry each one separately. That took hours. Tradition demanded time. Working mothers in the 1970s did not have hours, so they invented the casserole version. Same taste, a fraction of the effort. You roasted poblano peppers on the open gas burner until the skin blistered and the whole house filled with that smoky aroma. You peeled them and laid them flat in a 9x13 dish. You layered them with seasoned ground beef and thick slices of Monterey Jack cheese. Then you poured an egg milk flour batter over the top that baked into a fluffy golden custard. The casserole fed 8 people for about $3. Adaptation at its finest. This was what happened when tradition met a 40-hour work week. The flavor stayed exactly where it was supposed to be. The labor went down. That was the deal Mexican-American mothers made with every recipe they inherited. Keep the soul, lose the suffering. Number 2. Albondigas en caldo. The word albondigas comes from Arabic, al-bunduk. It means hazelnut, something small and round. The recipe traveled from North Africa to Spain to Mexico through centuries of history, and it landed in your abuela's kitchen on a weekday afternoon. Ground beef and pork mixed with raw white rice, egg, onion, garlic, and fresh mint, or hierba buena. pressed into the center of each meatball by hand. That mint inside the meatball is the detail most modern cooks have completely forgotten. The raw rice expands as it cooks in the broth, giving each meatball a texture you cannot get any other way. The broth was tomato-based, filled with potatoes, zucchini, carrots, and celery. A pot fed a family of 6 for about $2.50. This was one of the first dishes a young bride learned to make after her wedding. She stood beside her grandmother at the stove, nervous, trying to get the meatballs the right size. Abuela did not give measurements. She said a little of this, a handful of that, and you will know when it is ready by the smell. That was the recipe. Trust your hands. Trust the woman standing next to you. Number 1. Picadillo con papas. The word picadillo comes from the Spanish picar, meaning to mince. This recipe traveled from Spain to Latin America and landed in every Mexican household on the continent, every single one. But no two versions were the same. Northern Mexico kept it simple with potatoes and carrots. Central Mexico added olives, raisins, and capers in tomato sauce. Southern Mexico brought in local spices that changed from village to village. In the 1970s, in Mexican-American kitchens from El Paso to East Los Angeles, the recipe was this: 1 pound of ground beef at about 90 cents, 2 or 3 russet potatoes at 15 cents, carrots, Roma tomatoes, 1 jalapeno, onion, garlic, cumin, black pepper, chicken bouillon, and oregano. Total cost under $2 in 1972. That fed an entire family. The measurements were never written down anywhere. Just a little of this, a dash of that, and about this much held in a cupped palm. You stood beside your abuela, learning step by step. The smell of cumin and tomatoes hitting the hot skillet. That was how you knew dinner was coming. That was the smell of home. Picadillo con papas was not in any published cookbook. It did not need to be. It lived in the hands of every grandmother, every mother, every daughter who stood in that kitchen and learned by watching. The recipe was alive. It changed with every family, every generation, every kitchen it passed through. And it is still here. That is the proof that the best recipes do not come from books, they come from memory. Make one of these this week. Just one. Pick up a pound of ground beef and make the picadillo, the albondigas or the enchiladas. Sit down at the table, not the couch. Set a place. Eat it slow. Now, I am not a doctor or a dietitian. This is not medical advice. These are not health recommendations. These are memories. These 25 recipes were never just about stretching a pound of ground beef. They were about families making something out of almost nothing. They were about abuelas, who never measured a thing and still got it right every time. They were about traditions that crossed a border and became something new without losing what made them beautiful. Tell me in the comments which one your family made. I want to know if the picadillo gets more love than the enchiladas. I want to know if anyone else remembers the smell of cumin hitting a hot skillet at 6 in the evening. Because that railroad worker's wife in El Paso, the one who fed 7 people on $9 a week, she did not have a cookbook. She had her mother's hands, and that was enough.